I have seen a lot in my 40 years on this bench. I have watched people lie to my face with a smile so convincing that even I had to look twice. I have watched wealthy men walk into my courtroom believing their money would do their talking for them. I have seen arrogance, I have seen corruption, and I have seen cowardice dressed up as confidence more times than I can count. But I want you to understand something. In all of those 40 years, across every case, every defendant, every moment of courtroom drama I have ever witnessed, I have never once seen a grown man do what Marcus Holt did. Not in 4 decades, not even close. What he did on the evening of December 9th, 2025 was recorded on 2 live cameras. It was shared across social media more than 40 million times within 48 hours. It was reported in newspapers from London to Tokyo. It made people furious, it made people sick, and it made a room full of high school students, kids who had come to watch democracy in action, go completely silent with shock. I am going to tell you exactly what happened, every detail, every moment, and then I am going to tell you what happened 6 weeks later when Marcus Holt sat down in my courtroom and genuinely believed that he was going to walk out of there a free man. He was wrong. Now I need you to do something for me right now. Before this story goes 1 second further, hit that subscribe button, because what I'm about to share with you is something I've never spoken about publicly in this much detail. And I promise you, if you stay until the very end of this video, you are going to see justice served in a way that will restore something inside you, something that the news cycle has been slowly stealing from all of us. Subscribe, stay with me. You will not be sorry. Let me take you back to where this whole thing began. December 9th, 2025, Dearborn, Michigan. It was a cold Tuesday evening, the kind of bitter Midwest cold that gets into your bones before you even step out of your car. The Dearborn Community Center on Michigan Avenue was full that night. 340 people had shown up for the monthly town hall hosted by their United States Congresswoman, Diana Reyes. Now, I want you to understand who Diana Reyes is before I go any further, because this story only makes sense when you understand exactly the kind of person Marcus Holt chose as his target. Congresswoman Reyes was 48 years old. She was born and raised in Dearborn, the daughter of a man who worked the factory floor and a woman who served lunch to school children every single day for 27 years. Diana put herself through college on scholarships and part-time jobs. She spent 14 years teaching 8th grade English in Detroit public schools before she ever thought about running for office. She won her congressional seat by 3,200 votes, the closest race in her district's history. And every single month, without missing once in 6 years, she stood in a room just like that community center and took questions directly from her constituents. No teleprompter, no screened audience, no staff filtering who got to speak. Just her, a microphone, a yellow legal pad she brought every single time to write concerns down by hand, and the people she served. That night, 340 people filled the room, families, elderly residents, veterans, and in the very back rows, a group of 17 high school students who had come as part of a civics class field trip. Their teacher, Miss Patricia Wells, had told them before they arrived that seeing a real town hall was the most powerful lesson she could ever give them about how democracy works. She was absolutely right, just not in the way any of them expected, because 22 minutes into that town hall, a man named Marcus Holt, seated in the 4th row, calm as still water, slowly reached into a canvas bag at his feet. And what he did next changed everything. Marcus Holt was 44 years old. He lived in a quiet suburb outside Dearborn in a house worth $320,000. He drove a $54,000 pickup truck with custom modifications. He had no prior criminal record, which, when I read his file, made what he did even more chilling to me, not less, because this was not a man who had lost control in a moment of desperation. This was not someone backed into a corner with nothing left to lose. This was a man who had a stable home, a vehicle, a life, and who chose deliberately and with full premeditation to do what he did that night. Investigators later told me that in the 18 months before December 9th, Marcus Holt had been consuming political rage content online for an average of 12 hours a day, 12 hours. His search history, his watch history, his social media activity, all of it entered into evidence, painted the picture of a man who had slowly, methodically replaced every other interest in his life with pure, focused grievance. He had convinced himself that Congresswoman Reyes was personally responsible for a trade policy that he believed had contributed to the layoff he suffered 18 months earlier. Her office had responded to his written complaints twice, in writing, with detailed explanations. He had not accepted those explanations. He had instead decided to do something about it himself. 3 days before December 9th, Marcus Holt drove to a hardware store 14 miles from his home, not the one closest to him, investigators noted, but one far enough away that he likely believed he would not be recognized. He purchased a large industrial spray bottle. He took it home. And on a voice memo recorded on his phone the night before the town hall, a voice memo that was later recovered by investigators and entered into evidence in my courtroom. He rehearsed exactly what he planned to say. The memo lasted 4 minutes and 17 seconds. He practiced his words. He practiced his timing. He practiced the moment. This was not impulse. This was a performance. On the evening of December 9th, Marcus Holt arrived at the Dearborn Community Center 40 minutes early. He took a seat in the 4th row, close enough to the front to reach the podium quickly, far enough back to avoid immediate attention. He placed his canvas bag on the floor between his feet, and he waited. For 40 minutes, he sat there completely still while people filed in around him. Families, neighbors, veterans, 17 high school students settling into the back rows with notebooks open, ready to learn about democracy. Congresswoman Reyes took the stage at 7 p.m. sharp. For 22 minutes, she answered questions, tough ones, uncomfortable ones, questions from people who were angry and frustrated and scared about their lives and their futures. She answered every single one of them directly, without deflecting, without dismissing, without once talking down to the person asking. She stood at that podium with her yellow legal pad and she wrote things down by hand because she wanted every person in that room to see that she was actually listening. At 7 minutes and 22 seconds into the 3rd question period, the moderator called on Marcus Holt. He stood up slowly. He reached down into his canvas bag. And before a single person in that room had time to process what was happening, he walked 3 deliberate steps toward the podium and sprayed the entire contents of that bottle directly into Congresswoman Reyes's face and across her jacket. The room exploded, screaming, chairs scraping, children crying. One of the high school students in the back row later told investigators she thought it was an acid attack and she hit the floor. The 2 news cameras in the room caught everything in real time. Security reached Holt in seconds and pulled him back. He did not fight them. He did not run. He simply turned toward the crowd as they pulled him away, and he smiled. But here's the moment that I want you to hold on to, the moment that told me everything I needed to know about Diana Reyes before I ever met her. While that room was in chaos, while people were screaming and scrambling, she stood at that podium, wiped her face slowly with the back of her hand, leaned into the microphone, and said 7 words that silenced the entire room instantly. She said, "This town hall is not over yet." Those 7 words echoed through that community center like a thunderclap. This town hall is not over yet. The screaming stopped. The chaos froze. 340 people stood completely still and looked at this woman, her face still wet, her jacket soaked, her hands trembling slightly at her sides, and watched her straighten her back, pick up her yellow legal pad, and look out at the next person in line to ask a question. Like nothing in this world was going to move her from that spot. Like Marcus Holt had not just humiliated her in front of cameras that were broadcasting live. Like she had made a promise to those people, and no spray bottle, no coward in the 4th row, no amount of public humiliation was going to make her break it. She finished the entire town hall, every single question, every single answer. She stood at that podium for another 47 minutes after Marcus Holt was walked out of that building. When it was over, she shook hands with the people in the front row, thanked Ms. Patricia Wells and her civics students personally, and only then, only after every single constituent had been heard, did she allow a staff member to hand her a towel. I read every detail of that evening before Marcus Holt ever set foot in my courtroom. And I want to be honest with you about something. I have been doing this job for a very long time. I have trained myself to walk into every case without emotion, without bias, without a conclusion already forming in my mind. That is what justice requires. But when I read that she finished that town hall, when I understood what she had chosen to do in that moment, something shifted in me, not as a judge, as a human being. Marcus Holt was arrested on scene and charged with assault on a federal official, aggravated harassment, and premeditated disorderly conduct. His attorney, a man named Gerald Brock, a mid-level defense lawyer from the Detroit area who had spent most of his career handling DUI cases and minor civil disputes, immediately appeared on local television that same night, before his client had even been processed, before the charges had been formally filed. Gerald Brock stood in front of a camera outside the Wayne County Detention Center and announced with complete confidence that what his client had done was, and I am using his exact words here, a constitutionally protected act of political protest. He said the First Amendment gave his client the right to express his frustration with his elected representative. He said the charges were government overreach. He said Marcus Holt was a concerned citizen who had been ignored and silenced and had simply found a louder way to make himself heard. I watched that interview from my living room, and I will tell you exactly what I thought when I heard it. I thought, Mr. Brock, you are going to repeat those words inside my courtroom, and when you do, I am going to take them apart piece by piece until there is nothing left of that argument but dust. Now, I need to stop right here and ask you something. If you have been watching this far, if this story is doing something to you, making you feel something, making you want to see what happens next, do me one favor right now. Hit that like button. It costs you nothing. It takes 1 second, and it tells me that these stories matter to you, that justice matters to you, and it makes sure that more people get to hear what I'm about to tell you. Hit like right now and let us keep going. 6 weeks after December 9th, on the morning of January 15th, 2026, Marcus Holt walked into my courtroom at 9:12 a.m. He was wearing a crisp navy blue button-down shirt and pressed khaki trousers. His attorney had clearly coached him on appearance. His hair was neat. His shoes were polished. He looked like a man who had been carefully packaged to present maximum reasonableness to a judge and jury. He walked to the defendant's table with an ease that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Not nervous, not remorseful, not even slightly aware of the gravity of what was about to happen to him. He sat down, folded his hands on the table, and looked directly at me. And in his eyes, I saw something I have seen before in this courtroom, something that never ends well for the person carrying it. I saw absolute certainty that he was going to win. Congresswoman Diana Reyes sat in the gallery 3 rows back. No entourage, no political staff, no security detail, just her in a simple charcoal gray blazer, hands folded in her lap, back straight, eyes forward, the same composure she had shown at that podium 6 weeks earlier. She did not look at Marcus Holt once. She did not need to. She had already shown this city and this country exactly who she was. Now it was my turn. I called the case at 9:17 a.m., case number 2026 CR 047, State of Michigan versus Marcus Allen Holt. The courtroom was not large. It was not the kind of dramatic wood-paneled chamber you see in movies. It was a modest, functional room with fluorescent lighting and wooden benches that had absorbed 40 years of human stories. But that morning, it felt different. It felt charged, like the air before a thunderstorm when everything goes still and you can feel something enormous gathering just above you. Gerald Brock rose first. He adjusted his jacket, cleared his throat, and launched into the First Amendment argument he had been rehearsing since the night of December 9th. He was confident, almost theatrical. He told the court that his client had attended a public forum hosted by an elected official. He said that Marcus Holt had attempted on 2 separate occasions to have his concerns addressed through proper channels and had been ignored. He said that what occurred on December 9th was a spontaneous expression of political frustration, not a premeditated assault. He used the word spontaneous 4 times in his opening. I counted. I let him finish every single word without interrupting once because I wanted the record to contain his complete argument, every syllable of it. Then I asked him one question. I said, Mr. Brock, you used the word spontaneous. Can you explain to the court the industrial spray bottle that your client purchased 3 days before the town hall, 14 miles from his home at a store he had never previously visited? Brock's confidence flickered for just a moment, like a light bulb that briefly loses power. He recovered quickly and said his client had the bottle in his possession for unrelated household purposes. I wrote something on my notepad. I did not respond. I simply looked at him for a long moment and then asked the prosecutor to call the first witness. The prosecution presented its case over the next 2 hours with the kind of methodical precision that leaves no room for doubt. The lead investigator, Detective Raymond Cole, walked the court through the full timeline: the hardware store purchase, the 14-mile distance from Holt's home, the security footage showing Holt selecting the largest bottle on the shelf and paying in cash. Then Detective Cole played the voice memo, that 4-minute and 17-second recording that Marcus Holt had made on his own phone the night before the town hall. The courtroom listened in complete silence as Holt's own voice, calm, rehearsed, deliberate, walked through exactly what he planned to do and exactly what he planned to say. At the end of the memo, after the rehearsal was complete, he said 4 words that landed in that courtroom like a stone dropped into still water. He said, "She deserves this humiliation." I watched Marcus Holt's face while that recording played. The confidence was still there, but something underneath it had shifted. A tightening around the jaw, a stillness that was no longer relaxed but controlled. His attorney stared at the table. Then came the testimony I had been waiting for. Ms. Patricia Wells, the civics teacher, took the stand. She was 52 years old, 24 years in the classroom, the kind of teacher whose students come back years later just to say thank you. She described what her students experienced that night. She described the girl who hit the floor thinking it was an acid attack. She described the boy who had been so excited about the field trip that he had made his mother iron his shirt that morning. She described what she saw on their faces in the aftermath. Not just fear, but something worse than fear. Confusion. The specific confusion of a young person watching the thing they were taught to believe in get attacked right in front of them. Her voice was steady throughout. But when she said, "I have spent 24 years trying to make these kids believe that their voice matters in this democracy. And in 4 seconds, that man took a sledgehammer to everything I have ever taught them." I heard someone in the gallery behind me draw a sharp breath. Then it was Marcus Holt's turn to speak. His attorney advised him strongly against taking the stand. I watched Brock lean over and whisper urgently into his client's ear. Holt listened, nodded slowly, and then stood up anyway. He looked at me directly and began to speak, and what came out of his mouth in the next 4 minutes was the most breathtaking display of unapologetic arrogance I have encountered in 40 years on this bench. He said that Congresswoman Reyes had failed her constituents. He said that nobody listened until somebody made them listen. He said that what he did was no different from the protest movements that shaped this country's history. He actually said that. He compared himself, a man who had ambushed a woman at a podium with a spray bottle after rehearsing it on a voice memo, to the protest movements that shaped American democracy. And then he leaned slightly forward and said something that made Gerald Brock close his eyes. He said, "And I would do it again." The courtroom went absolutely silent, not the polite silence of people being respectful, the stunned silence of people who cannot believe what they just heard. In the third row of the gallery, the retired FBI agent who had been observing the proceedings stood straight up out of his seat, not dramatically, not theatrically, just the involuntary physical reaction of a man whose body responded before his mind caught up with what he had just heard. I looked at Marcus Holt for a long moment, and then I picked up my pen and I began to write. I put my pen down. I looked at Marcus Holt standing at that defendant's table. This man who had rehearsed his performance on a voice memo, who had driven 14 miles to buy his weapon in cash, who had sat in that fourth row for 40 minutes waiting, who had smiled as they walked him out, and who had just told my courtroom, told the law, told this community, told those 17 teenagers whose faith in democracy he had shattered in 4 seconds, that he would do it again. I looked at him for a long moment, and then I spoke. I said, "Mr. Holt, I have listened to everything you have said in this courtroom today with complete patience. I have given you every opportunity that this legal system provides. And now I am going to return the favor by being completely honest with you. What you did on December 9th was not protest. Protest is a sign. Protest is a march. Protest is standing outside that community center with every word you wanted to say written in block letters on a piece of cardboard. What you did was purchase a weapon, rehearse its deployment on a voice memo, drive it 14 miles from your home to avoid detection, carry it into a public forum, and use it to physically assault a woman who was doing nothing more than standing at a podium and doing her job. You did not go to that town hall to be heard. The evidence proves you went there to humiliate. And the fact that you are standing in this courtroom right now telling me you would do it again tells me everything I need to know about whether you understand the weight of what you have done. I paused. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the fluorescent light above the jury box. I said, "You spoke about protest movements. You invoked the history of people who stood up for democracy in this country. I want you to think very carefully about that comparison. The people you referenced faced fire hoses and batons and jail cells and worse, not because they ambushed someone at a podium, but because they demanded the right to be heard through legitimate means in a system that was actively trying to silence them. Congresswoman Reyes was not silencing you. She answered your letters. She stood in that room and took every question. You had a microphone and a moment and a democracy that was fully prepared to listen to you, and you chose a spray bottle instead. Do not insult the memory of the people whose shoulders this democracy stands on by comparing yourself to them." Gerald Brock was staring at the table. Marcus Holt's jaw had tightened into something unreadable. In the gallery, Congresswoman Reyes sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes steady and forward, the same composure she had carried through every single moment of this. Then I delivered the verdict. Guilty on all 3 counts: assault on a federal official, aggravated harassment, premeditated disorderly conduct. The maximum fine on each charge, $42,000 total. And then I added the sentence that made the entire courtroom exhale at once: 12 months of mandatory community service, to be completed specifically as a volunteer assistant at public town hall events across Wayne County every month, without exception. He would set up the chairs, he would hand out the agendas, he would stand in the back of the room and watch elected officials answer questions from their constituents, and he would do it for a full year. Gerald Brock's mouth opened slightly. Marcus Holt looked at me like I had said something in a language he did not speak. And from the gallery, quiet, controlled, dignified, I heard Congresswoman Diana Reyes exhale one single breath. That was all, one breath. But I heard it. Before I closed that session, I said one final thing for the record. I said, Congresswoman Reyes, on the evening of December 9th, while chaos surrounded her, chose to finish her town hall. She chose her constituents over her comfort. She chose her duty over her humiliation. This court recognizes that courage, and this court will not dishonor it by treating what was done to her as anything less than what it was. I banged my gavel. Court was adjourned. 6 months later, I received a letter from Ms. Patricia Wells. She told me that her civics class, the same 17 students who had watched Marcus Holt reach into that canvas bag, had written a collective letter to Congresswoman Reyes after the verdict came down. They told her that watching her finish that town hall was the most important thing they had ever seen. 3 of those students had since registered to vote the moment they turned 18. One of them, a 17-year-old girl named Aaliyah, had started a school club dedicated to civic engagement. Ms. Wells said that what began as the worst field trip of her career had become the most powerful lesson she had ever taught. Not because of what Marcus Holt did, but because of what Diana Reyes chose to do in response to it. I think about that a lot. I think about the fact that in the moment he sprayed that bottle, Marcus Holt genuinely believed he was winning. He believed he was taking something from her. And instead, in front of 340 people and 2 live cameras, he handed her the single most powerful moment of her entire career. He handed those 17 teenagers a lesson about dignity and courage that no textbook could ever teach. And he handed himself 12 months of standing in the back of town halls, watching democracy work, whether he wanted to or not. Justice does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives as a gavel. Sometimes it arrives as a woman straightening her back at a podium and finishing what she started. But it arrives. In 40 years on this bench, that is the one thing I have never stopped believing. If this story moved you, If you felt something watching justice find its way to the right place, then I need you to do 3 things right now. First, hit that subscribe button so you never miss another story from these 40 years on the bench. Second, leave a comment right now and tell me, what did you feel when Holt said, "I would do it again"? I want to read every single response. And third, watch the video that is on your screen right now, because the next story I am going to tell you is about a billionaire who walked into my courtroom with 7 lawyers, a $90,000 briefcase, and the absolute certainty that his money would buy him a different kind of justice. What happened instead will make you stand up out of your seat. I will see you there.